Alright, magandang umaga, magandang tanghali, at magandang gabi sa lahat. Ako nga pala si Brian Anthony Garcia.
At ako naman si Michael John Peña at kasama natin ngayon si Philip Domingo. So, Philip, tell us something about yourself. Ano bang ginagawa mo at saan ka passionate?
Hey, yeah. So, first, thanks for having me. So, again, I'm Philip Domingo. I currently work as a cloud solutions architect at Microsoft, specifically Microsoft Philippines. So, what I do is, I work with different sort of customer from enterprise, public sector, sometimes, small businesses as well. And what I basically do is I act as their technical advisor, to basically help them make the most out of Azure. So, let's say they're bringing their on-prem application to the cloud, or they want to build their data center into the cloud. So that's where I come in. I help provide guidance on what's the best way, the most efficient way for them to build their infrastructure when it comes to Azure. When it comes to my passions, well, of course, number one is technology. So, ever since we get to know each other, I've been very passionate about technologies, not just in the cloud, but, any technologies that looks promising for me. So, back then, started doing web development, then started exploring AI, and then now primarily focus on cloud. Other than technology, finances also, not specifically just money, but it's more of, learning about investing, basically how to make money work for you. So that's the other thing that I can't help to spend my time with, just learning a lot of things about it. Yeah, that's about it.
Okay, so Brian, ano nga bang topic natin for today?
So, ang pag-uusapan natin ngayon is about Windows Virtual Desktop. So, this is relatively new, I think. So, magandang pag-usapan natin to ngayon kasi lalo na kasama natin si Philip, which is a lot of experience na rin dito. So, Philip, ano nga ba tong Windows Virtual Desktop?
Yeah, so yung Windows Virtual Desktop, or what we call as WVD, is actually a first-party virtual desktop solution in Azure. So I'm saying na first party because if you actually look at Azure, specifically the marketplace, diba? If you look at the marketplace, it's not like WVD is your only option if you want to build virtual desktop. So if, for example, kung tinitignan mo yung other third-party solutions like Citrix or Teradc as your virtual desktop, as your preferred virtual desktop solution, you're still free to do so. So in this case, if you're looking for more of a first party, that's where the Windows Virtual Desktop comes in. And it works just like many other virtual desktop solutions, but of course, has some primarily differentiator compared to other virtual desktop solutions na alam natin. And I also think na it's very timely. Magandang pag-usapan yung topic na to right now, primarily because of our current situation, di ba? Kasi, pandemic. A lot of people working from home. A lot of people na, a lot of organization, in spite of them wanting to do work, are still having a hard time because of the lockdown, especially during the start of the pandemic. And even right now, I believe most of them are still functioning on a skeletal workforce, in where majority of their employees, still working from home. So with this, having this Windows Virtual Desktop solution, at least pwede natin mabigyan yung mga listeners to an idea, if they're in that situation also in their organization, how do they address that? How they can better address that with virtual desktops, specifically in this case WVD.
So another question lang din, how is it different from virtual machines nga ba? You have any maybe specific or brief explanation kung ano nga ba talaga yung difference nila?
Yeah, it's more of it's not really more of a difference between a virtual machine versus Windows Virtual Desktop, because if you look at Windows Virtual Desktop on the nitty-gritty technical details, at the end of the day, it's still using a virtual machine. So kumbaga, it complements. So if you're familiar with Azure virtual machines, it uses the same thing. At the end of the day, if you look at the infrastructure within the Azure portal, of course, specifically in Azure, it's just a virtual machine. So siguro more of a question is why use a Windows Virtual Desktop compared to just a usual virtual machine? Of course, number one is when it comes to security, kasi whereas pagdating sa Windows Virtual Desktop, pagdating sa mga, let's say, remote connections, doesn't necessarily have to use yung mga typical RDP port na 3389. You don't have to expose your public IP. You don't have to expose a public endpoint to your virtual machines. Kasi alam mo naman, pagdating sa, maybe not just in the cloud, but VMs in general, very common yung mga brute force attacks. And I've seen that happen to a lot of customers. So in the case of WVD, you don't think about it. It basically uses HTTPS port, and you don't have to have a public IPs for your virtual machines. So yung mga ganun. And then other
nabanggit
things.
mo yan, Philip, di ba? Kasi siguro, could you explain, does it come with a client of its own? Di ba? Instead of, let's say, a VM on Azure or any other cloud provider, di ba you usually use RDP to remote desktop? So, does WVD comes with a client?
Yes, great question. So, not to be confused with the remote desktop application that comes with Windows 10 Pro, at least, and above. Di ba kasi, when you use Windows 10 Pro, at least, meron na siya remote desktop that we typically, just tulad ng na-mention ni Penny, na you would typically use to access a virtual machine via RDP. So in the case of WVD, yes, it uses a different remote desktop client, which is also called remote desktop, that is available in different operating systems. So in Android, you can just basically download the remote desktop client in the Play Store. Same thing with iOS and Mac. And then with Windows, there's also a separate one that you have to install for remote desktop. And then, for example, if the operating system that you're using or the machine that you're using is not supported to use the remote desktop client, application, you have the option to use web client instead. So browser based na lang yung magiging experience mo accessing Windows.
So it seems like if I am a company and I need to get my employees work remotely, and securely, dahil sabihin na natin ngayon, pandemic, maybe in just a few hours, or let's just say over the weekend, I can have them log into these virtual desktops by hundreds or even thousands of them, as if parang nag-work lang sila sa office, and yun, pwede rin ba na as a company na ma-manage and ma-monitor ko tong mga itong each of these desktops?
That's one of the very essence of Windows Virtual Desktop. Kasi if you're looking at large scale, let's say if you're looking at having thousands of users within your organization using Windows Virtual Desktop, of course, it's very important that you get to monitor ano ba yung mga utilization, especially when it comes to disk, yung mga Windows yung mga virtual machine mo, which in the case of WVD is called session host VMs. So meron siya. And then of course in terms of management like scaling and things like that, or yung mga configuration for desktop or rather device redirection, or yung mga remote desktop settings and things like that, you can handle that within Windows Virtual Desktop. And I would say that's one of the very purpose of WVD as well.
Yeah. And I think another thing, from what I heard, that you can actually create your own custom parang workbook and even custom actions then, no? Para like for example, if something happens, you can actually run something to fix an issue within these desktops. I don't know. I just heard that from one of the talks then before.
Yeah. So if ever something goes wrong, let's say nag-boot up ka ng session host VM within your WVD environment and it's not running in spite of it na kumbaga yung status ng virtual machine is already running but no one can access it, you can configure it in a way na mag-reprovision, kumbaga destroy that virtual machine and then create a new one, which is a fresh spin up ng VM, which is a high possibility for it to work properly this time around.
Nice.
So, tanong ko lang, on a different note, siguro parang bridge yung difference. Let's say, di ba ngayon nauso na rin naman yung BYOD and a lot of companies uses SaaS applications such as Office 365, Microsoft 365, Google, Google Cloud and stuff like that. So how is this different from that? Let's say yung mga specific workflows or ano yung mga specific use cases na beyond yung mga Teams, beyond yung email and stuff like that.
So number one, like in my case, diba, na-mention ko during the introduction, I've been working with a lot of enterprise and public sector customers in the Philippines. So of course, in terms of how they do work, how employees do work, very critical yung, of course, yung confidentiality na dapat yung mga applications na available internally pa din. Kumbaga, they shouldn't be exposing those internal application publicly para lang makapag-work yung mga employees. So where Windows Virtual Desktop comes in, well, actually, on another note, I think it's much better to start first na ano ba yung initial difference kasi na-mention nyo kanina versus Windows Virtual Desktop versus having your own device, Windows Virtual Desktop versus using just web-based applications like yung Office 365 and things like that. So let me start off first siguro with how does it compare to other virtual desktop solutions, like let's say Citrix, TerraVC, or AWS Workspace. So para lang at least as I talk about yung mga comparison niya, whether should I be using a BYOD or no, or should I use Windows Virtual Desktop, at least it will make more sense. So number one of the biggest I would say differentiator of Windows Virtual Desktop is usually kasi diba, if you've used other virtual desktop solutions, how it works is a 1:1 approach, right? Meaning to say, isang user, isang virtual machine, and then so on and so forth. Now, with Windows Virtual Desktop, you can still do the same thing, depending on your use case. But most of the time, at least I would say 99% of my customers, how we do things is may kami tinatawag na pooled session. So meaning to say, you can have like a virtual machine that can be used by multiple users. So if you think about infrastructure cost, it will definitely be, there's a high possibility that it could be cheaper, because let's say you're catering for about 1,000 users, instead of having 1,000 VMs as well to cater for each of those users, at least, in this case, let's say you can just have 10 to 14 virtual machines that will be used by thousands of users, concurrent users. So merong ganon. And then, where it comes in versus BYOD, is of course depends on the use case as well. So a lot of it will revolve dun sa use case nyo, no? So let's say in one of my customers, ang use case nila is primarily on their digital agents sa call center nila, that in where they address yung mga customer inquiries kasi it's coming from energy industry. And then of course the thing is, since they're using Windows Virtual Desktop, what they need to address is, these digital agents needs to access internal applications na ginagamit nila for, to monitor ano na ba yung status ng mga tickets na coming from the customers. So, but still at the same time, securing it na walang naka-expose via internet. Kailangan everything else that's working is within the network pa rin. So, in that case, that's where you can leverage na yung infrastructure in Azure, build up a site as a VPN or Express route. So from Windows Virtual Desktop, it can communicate privately to the on-prem. And then from there, access the internal application. So may mga ganon. And many other things. Again, it will depend on the use case talaga.
Alright. So, kung kung sakali, let's say dun nga sa use case kanina ng mga call center, if kumbaga yung application itself for them to work, side-loaded na siya dun sa virtual desktop, di ba? I mean, sa Windows Virtual Desktop.
Yep. And actually, kasi, that's true. Kasi the thing is, if you're gonna be building your own Windows Virtual Desktop environment, one of the, I would say, prerequisites is to build a golden image. So from the golden image, basically dun mo na i-install everything na kailangan mo. Let's say yung mga internal applications na gagamitin ng mga end users, could be Office 365, yung mga actual configuration like time zone, and anything else that you would use dun sa the employees would use within the Windows Virtual Desktop applications. Dun mo na ilalagay. So that when you spin up a Windows Virtual Desktop, magbibisa lang siya dun sa golden image mo. And kahit gaano ka pa dami pang virtual machines yung i-provision mo, it will have the same, software installed.
Alright. So, kumbaga, talagang naka-sandbox na dun yung workflow mo. So, yung personal BYOD mo, hindi mo na kailangan mag-install ng kung ano-anong applications,
Exactly.
install ng mga runtimes and everything para makapag-work.
Yeah.
So,
And of course, we're talking about BYOD, and for most organization, they don't want their those BYOD devices to have confidential data, because you also have to secure that. So with
Right.
Windows Virtual Desktop, di ba, you wanna separate it na pag Windows Virtual Desktop, you should be only accessing corporate, data. And then if you go back to your local machine, to your actual device, your personal device, dapat yung personal device lang talaga, or rather personal data lang yung nandoon. So there's no mix. So yun din yung pine-prevent natin on that one.
Mhm. Since you've mentioned security na rin, kasi I've seen a lot of companies being really firm when it comes to security. And I was just wondering, since na-mention na rin na itong Windows Virtual Desktop, it is secured. What are the ways for for you or for a company to secure these virtual desktops, and what are your kind of like recommendations talaga, or yung usually ginagamit ng mga companies or clients mo?
Yeah. So when it comes to when we talk about security, it's actually a broad discussion. So there's a lot of things to think about when it comes to security, but maybe to start off specifically in Windows Virtual Desktop. So like yung mention ko kanina, if you're concerned about your security when it comes to your infrastructure, kasi 'di ba yung na-mention ko, very common sa mga virtual machines yung mga brute force attacks, especially kapag naiiwan yung mga RDP or SSH ports being open to public. Diyan nangyayari yung mga malicious attacks, di ba? So in the case of WVD, you don't need to open your RDP port via internet. So how it works is, number one, tulad ng mention ko kanina, walang public IP yung mga virtual machines mo within Windows Virtual Desktop. How it works, how it's able to communicate from the remote desktop client to the actual session host VMs within WVD is when you register your virtual machine as a session host within WVD, it implicitly installs an agent. So yung agent na yun na yung nag-handle yung mga communication dun sa client, or yung kumbaga everything else that you would need to monitor yung mga session host VMs mo, like sending a heartbeat, kung available pa ba yung VM. And ayun nga, if you're gonna be accessing yung Windows Virtual Desktop using the remote desktop client, via 443 na siya. And how yung kumbaga yung agent na yung nag-handle on that one. So again, when it comes to infrastructure, yun kumbaga that's one way to secure it. Again, one way kasi of course there's also other ways to take a look at, kasi securing it within the infrastructure, also within the network, is another thing. And then siguro another common thing na usually, kasi in one of my use cases, nag-deploy ako ng Windows Virtual Desktop sa bank. And of course, di ba? We're talking about bank, yan, very, very, talagang it overthinks a lot of things sa pagdating sa security, which is good kasi bangko eh. So in this case, another thing na gusto nilang i-prevent is yung mga external access. So let's say, okay, I'm a user using Windows Virtual Desktop. How do I ensure yung kumbaga yung IT operations? How do they ensure na if they're using the end users are already using Windows Virtual Desktop, hindi sila basta-basta nakakapag-browse ng any website, hindi sila basta-basta nakakapag-download ng kung ano-ano, kasi 'di ba? Mabilis yung internet sa mga virtual machines, 'di ba? So that's where you can think about making use of network firewalls like Azure Firewall, or any existing network firewalls that you're using within your organization. Or yung iba, kasi sometimes yung network firewall, for some who are just doing a small Windows version and desktop environment for their organization, it could be a bit expensive. So another approach that they're doing is via policies, via GPO within Active Directory. So doon nila kinokontrol kung ano yung mga pwedeng i-access nung mga users, let's say, especially when it comes to internet, yung mga web browsing. So again, those are some, and those are very common, at least in my experience sa mga other customers. But of course, there are other things also pagdating sa security center, DDoS protection, and things like that.
Right. And it seems like you've seen this being used in a lot of in a lot of your clients or in your companies.
A lot,
especially sa situation natin ngayon. I think what I would like to ask is, without naming any companies naman, specific companies, I would like to know parang may ano yung pinaka, or ano yung one of the stories na may kwento mo na parang, alam mo yun, parang na-save talaga yung company na yun because of this service, because of Windows Virtual Desktop.
Yeah, yung which is yung na-mention ko kanina. So that's one example, no? Yung in where start of the pandemic, lockdown, a lot of people, cannot go to the office to do work. And in the case, in this case, yung kinakita ko kanina, call center eh. Pagdating sa call
Right.
center, usually pagdating sa at least in this company, usually yung setup nila naka-desktop desktop setup. And then of course, challenge din na ipadala yung mga desktop na yun sa mga kanya-kanyang bahay ng mga employees because of many reasons. So
Right.
the thing is, in spite of the pandemic, how can these people still do work? No, especially for yung mga new hires. Kasi 'di ba, they have to address a lot of things eh. Customer inquiries, and these are call center, very busy. So that's where Windows Virtual Desktop comes in. Kasi it's just you can still use yung for the employees, ginawang requirement na especially doon sa magiging new hire, they have to have their own device and of course a decent internet connection para they can still use Windows Virtual Desktop. So, it's about, kumbaga, yung use case doon has about 1,000 plus employees, call center employees who used Windows Virtual Desktop. So, I'd say that was very critical for the business. Very, very critical. Kasi very urgent then during that time. Kasi it's coming from an energy industry. There was a lot of concern from the customer. So, ang daming kailangan i-address by that company. So, I would say that's one of the use cases in where Windows Virtual Desktop really, really helps for that organization.
And I think just a follow-up question. Again, this is being used right now because of the current situation. Not really sure if yun lang yung reason. Pero I think in the coming years kasi mas talong dadami pa yung nag-work or nag-remote work, no? And it's not just because of the pandemic.
Yes.
Even just, like in a normal, even sa normal situation na once matapos na tong pandemic. Is this something na nakikita mo, or itong Windows Virtual Desktop, na nakikita mo na gagamitin heavily in the next few years?
Yes.
In 5 years.
100% yes. Bakit? Kasi right now, di ba, I'm working with a lot of customers. And initially, the main reason kung bakit namin, or kung bakit nila ina-explore, or kung bakit na namin ginagamit right now yung Windows Virtual Desktop is primarily because of the pandemic. Now, a lot of these organizations are thinking about adapting to the new normal. So some of them are already deciding na, maybe let's think about 10 to 20% of our workforce will be permanently working from home. So in this case, they're looking for a viable solution that these, employees working from home can still, work properly while having, security in mind because of, the confidentiality of the data within the organization. So I would say that's where, Windows Virtual Desktop could come in. And it would be very critical moving forward. Kasi, di ba, again, a lot of people, a lot of organization would probably start adapting na to the new normal. Kasi what if a decade from now, it happens again? With panic ulit. Yung mga ganun eh. So, they're already, kumbaga, for them, they don't want it to happen twice. Kaya, they're thinking of adapting to the new normal.
So ano lang may tanong din ako. I mean, not really a question, but more around comment around this. So, okay rin bang use case to for cases like yung mga temporary employees, mga contractors? Where
Yes.
do you think, di ba, parang may pasok ba yung use case din doon?
Yeah, definitely. So just to share, and one of my customers, so ang situation nila is same thing, pandemic, skeletal workforce. So marami pa din sa employees sila working from home, but at the same time, they're hiring new employees, and some of them they're hiring short-term contractors, let's say 3 to 6 months lang employment. Now, initial challenge na naiisip nila, the problem kasi is some of the employees that was hired was from far places, kasi mga provinces, which is very far from the business-centric locations like Makati, BGC, and the likes. Kumbaga kung saan mostly nagre-reside yung mga organizations, yung mga customers that I've been working with. So, ang challenge nila, given na if magpa-provide sila ng corporate laptop, of course, it might take some time because of the distance. Malayo eh. And then at the same time, if they're thinking about yung mga support, what if, for example, nagloko yung corporate laptop, nagkaroon ng hardware issue, paano nila ayusin yun? Diba? It cannot be easily addressed kasi ibabalik pa sa kanila yon, and then kapag naayos na, iba pa deliver na naman nila ulit. And then at the same time, let's say natapos na yung employment period, yung contract period nung employee. Syempre another thing is ibabalik na naman, which could take some time. So may mga ganun challenges. So now, what these organizations are thinking is that why not look at Windows Virtual Desktop? So by the time na mag-onboard sila, instead na mag-antay pa magpa-deliver ng laptop, just give them access to Virtual Desktop, Windows Virtual Desktop, and they're good to go. Diba? And they can be up and running agad. So of course, you also have to consider yung bandwidth and things like that.
Right. That's a real problem actually. You're in our company, problema namin ngayon.
So baka
ano lang din,
testing it.
Okay. So parang siguro lang din, no. I think one thing to consider is siguro meron din siyang upfront investment, 'di ba? Such as yung internet and yung BYOD itself, right? So I think something to consider din, 'di ba, Philip?
Yeah, tama. So usually, for some organization, they're thinking about ano bang mas okay, mag-provide na lang tayo ng mga corporate provided laptops or yung Windows Virtual Desktop. So may mga ganun din. And yun nga, considering yung magiging internet connection, but in my case naman, some organization, especially kapag very critical talaga yung gagawin ng employees, they make the decision to invest to improve the internet connection of their employees, no, to do better work while still working from home. Even in Microsoft, it's the same thing.
All right. So last question about this WVD in particular is, tingin mo ba may use case din siya for startups, especially companies na maliit yung running costs at maliit yung capital?
Possible, yeah. Kasi it will depend on the use case. Depende dun sa the nature of the startup, kung paano ba nila gusto mag-work, especially considering yung mga kung meron bang confidential data na they have to secure, na ayaw nila basta-bastang malagay lang sa mga unmanaged device or yung mga BYOD. It's gonna depend definitely on the use case. But yes, it's not only specific sa mga enterprise. I would say it's still relevant even to smaller organizations as well. Like na-mention ni Brian, di ba? May mga challenge sila na sa pagdating sa employees na malalayo, tapos kailangan pa nila mag-provide ng mga company laptops. So maybe that could be a thing. They could just look at Windows Virtual Desktop, and then from there, compare cost na lang. Mas makakatipid ba? Right. Kung bibili na lang ng laptop na, of course, you also have to think about, tuwing kailan ba nire-replace yung laptop na yan, 2 to 3 years. So, you do the comparison na lang in terms of cost pagdating ba.
Right. Alright, so I guess that's all that we can discuss for this podcast. We have a lot of things that we can talk about, but I guess that's what that's the time that we have for now. So I guess let's just wrap it up and pag-usapan natin mga takeaways natin. So Michael, anong takeaway mo dito?
Alright. So I think ang biggest takeaway ko dito is I think may saktong market talaga tong si WVD, borderline between yung full BYOD experience na sarili mong laptop, tas email, Teams, or anything like that. And on the other hand is yung fully managed SOE device with VPN access. So parang WVD is somewhere in between, na parang meron talaga siyang sweet spot para dito. And I think it's really a good product. And I'm very excited na i-try it out on my own. Ikaw naman, Brian, anong key takeaway mo dito?
Well, actually, this for me makes a lot of sense, lalo na ngayong pandemic, biglaan natin kailangan mag-work from home. So virtual desktops makes a lot of sense, and setting up hundreds and thousands of desktops can be accessed by your employees. It can be set up as easy as kind of like 1, 2, 3. So parang within the weekend kaya mo na agad siyang ma-set up and it's really easy to manage and to monitor na rin. So I feel like this is something like what Philip mentioned. This is something that definitely gonna be used heavily in the future, and I really hope so. And yeah, I think that's all for me. Again, we would like to thank you, Philip, for joining us. So
thank you too.
Philip, Philip, paano kanila ma-reach out? Ano yung socials and things like that?
Yeah, so you can reach me out if via email. You can actually initially you can go to my website prtdomingo.com. So again, that's prtdomingo.com. So from there, actually yung my social media links nandoon na sa about. But if you want to go to it directly, just search for PRT Domingo in Facebook, Twitter, I think even on LinkedIn. I believe it's it's the same thing. So you can reach out to me there. Even my email my email address is listed there. So if you have any questions, you want to chat, feel free to go to this to go to those to go to my website.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Philip.
Mhm.
All right.
And I guess that's all for this podcast. Again, maraming salamat.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.